Yeah, are people reading a particular book, or do you have a?
Yeah, the Suzanne Stabile and Ron Real Back to You.
Oh,
Finally, somebody at work. Oh, I love that book. Hey, how's Grandma and Grandpa doing? Hey, I saw this picture that they posted on Facebook today of the one guy.
I think I'm gonna sit. All right. Well, it is 7 o'clock, and we will go ahead and get started, and those who trickle in are welcome to join in. We hope that you were able to find the video, either live streaming at the moment or through YouTube later on, from the class we did last week on wands, where Lori was willing and gracious enough to share, and her husband Chris came as well, and we focused on how the Enneagram can be useful in a marriage or any relationship. It was super helpful. Today we're looking at the twos, and our guest is Kay Bontrager Singer. That'll come later. We're also doing a deep dive then into better understanding the move of stress and security. So they say that in Enneagram that each of us, that we have a core number that we live in 24/7. When we are in times of stress, we have a number that we move to and pick up the unhealthy qualities of that stress number during hard times when we're under fire or stretched to our limits or beyond. And we also have a number called our security number that we move to when we're ready to grow, and we pick up the positive qualities of that particular number. So let's try to see if we can understand that really fully. So stress and security right now, it is sometimes called health and unhealth. Sometimes it's called integration and disintegration. And I've always liked the terms stress and security. And the reason for that was because I definitely could see myself not being my best self when I was clearly stressed and to the max. I had a piano student yesterday who sat down at her lesson last night and said, I gotta admit, I really didn't, as an adult student, I really didn't practice too much. The middle school, the junior high musical was this weekend. I volunteered to take tickets twice. I really haven't had a minute to call my soul my own this week. And I'm like, my youngest just went away to school in the fall, and all that life seems like a distant memory. I am not living that life anymore, but I remember it, and it often didn't bring out the best in me. So thinking of it in terms of stress and security, I preferred that because I identified it with times that were clearly stressful for me. Now, I don't know if this story is like too personal or not helpful, but I'll tell it to you. Like being in a health crisis right now, I'm in stress, but my world is pretty small. Like my day-to-day stuff, through chemotherapy, which is over now, but through chemotherapy, I kept my world really small. And there were many days where I didn't leave the house. So in that way, it wasn't stressful. I could spend that day largely however I wanted to, many of those days. But even though my prognosis is good and I'm not scared per se, I'm in stress. Everything is harder now, and things weigh on me, and thinking is harder, and negotiating and compromising is harder. So I'm noticing aspects of my stress number. I don't think I'll tell you the stories of what I'm noticing. I don't know if I want you to know me that well, but
You expect me to tell mine,
Right, it's your turn tonight, Kay. But I found it interesting that though my life isn't stressful, I am in stress during this season of my life. So we're all inclined to pick up some behaviors of another number when we're moving toward health and growth, and this is called your security number. So if you look at an Enneagram graphic that has the circle and then arrows going to and from that, the arrow pointing toward your number, if you know you're a 2 or if you know you're a 4, the arrow that points toward the 4 leads from the number that is our security number. That's where we draw energy and behaviors from during those times of growth. The number on the end of that other line, the arrow that points away from our number, represents how the person is likely to act out if they're under stress, under pressure, or under fire, and when they're feeling more out of control. What gets us into those numbers is often situational. It's part of the reason that I have preferred the term stress and security, partly because I recognize those less desirable behaviors creeping in when I am in literal times of stress. Remember that it could be a moment of stress leading to a moment of stress behavior. But sometimes, I guess like what I'm experiencing, it's a season of stress leading to maybe a longer season of stress behavior. Or maybe when we're in a pandemic, or maybe when things are terrible at work or something. Security can refer to either the sense of feeling secure in who we are and in a good place, or a sense of feeling like we can let go of our personality mask. Remember that they describe the personality as a mask, which is false. It's a false persona that we put on to try to survive when we were little people. We learned it when we were little, and then it's not helpful when we're adults. Now, no matter what number you are, the stress and security numbers are important influences. One of the reasons that it can be useful to take one of those online tests, especially if they're online tests that give you maybe you scored high in 3 things. Well, if you score high in 4 and 5 and 1, that could be interesting. Any of those numbers could be your core number, or look at it this way. If you're a 4, maybe you're a 4 with a 5 wing. And in security, 4s go to 1. So those relationships between the numbers, when you take those online tests, even though they're often wrong, can give you some interesting things to point to. I often think it's really interesting if you score high in 2 next-door neighbor numbers, because it's pretty likely that 1 is your core number and 1 is a wing. Part of doing your work with the Enneagram is becoming aware that sometimes our greatest strengths can become our biggest weaknesses when we're out of balance. But when you're crushing it, your great traits can become your superpower. Ultimately, the goal for all of us is to be able to move around the Enneagram and pick up, when I'm a 4, we'll learn about the 4 later, but in times of security, it's really great for me to pick up the attention to detail and the ability to follow through with tasks that I get from my security number, which is 1. And I can pick up the great qualities of 5 and 3, which would be potential wings. We have access to the numbers around the chart. And we want to integrate the great aspects of what each type symbolizes and gaining the healthy potential of all the types. The ideal is to become a balanced, whole person who can draw on the virtue of each as needed. Each of the types of the Enneagram symbolizes different important aspects of what we need to achieve this end. The personality type we begin life with is therefore less important ultimately than how well or how badly we use our type as the beginning point for our self-development and growth. So when we talk about being able to move around the Enneagram, I think I gave the imagery several weeks ago, where it's as though we live in a house with 9 rooms, and each of those rooms is perfectly appointed for the task that's to be done there. So remaining in your type, solidly in your type, is a little bit like trying to do your cooking in the powder room or conduct business from your side of the bed. So we want to be able to use the characteristics and the virtues of all the numbers of the Enneagram for the tasks that we're charged to do. Moving on now to type 2. So I told you once before that, the danger of the online tests, the free online tests, is that they're wrong 60% of the time. And type 2 is the type that church-going women are often mistyped as, because we are doubly conditioned to put our needs last and to serve others. Because that's a Christian value, and it's what society lets us know is the picture of the ideal woman. But there's certainly nothing unmasculine about a 2. Suzanne Stabile has told this story before of there's a really well-known Enneagram teacher named Helen Palmer who did an Enneagram workshop with the Rams. And the center, I think, I'm saying words here. I don't know what the center is. But I think it was in the story, the center of the Rams came to her in a break and said, "Ms. Palmer, I want you to know that I'm a 2 on the Enneagram, but it's important for me to know that you know that I do my job." So when my quarterback, am I saying right words, Michael? Is the center like going after somebody who's after his quarterback? All right, so when my quarterback is being, scoped out by somebody else, I am just gonna take that guy down. And then after the whistle is blown, I help him back up. And if no one's looking, I say, "Are we good?" So that's a 2 on the Enneagram. Common characteristics of the 2. They are generous in loving and caring for others well. They are loving and lovable, adaptable, reluctant to express their own needs. They consciously or unconsciously expect something in return for their caring attentiveness to others, and they may struggle to maintain appropriate boundaries. They're sensitive to criticism. They're selfless caregivers. At their best, they're warm and generous, and at their worst, they're resentful martyrs. So here we enter, the 3 numbers that we've met so far have been in the anger triad, and so those are the folks who are doing dominant. So sometimes it's called the gut triad because they're very impulsive. They act on their impulse, and the key thing is that they act, they do. Now we're entering those who are feeling dominant. Sometimes it's called the heart triad, and it's also called the shame triad. So I want to introduce you to the shame triad. I think fear we understand, anger we understand, but it's always helpful to clarify the shame aspect. Oops. So I like Brené Brown's definition of shame. Talked about it, I think, last week just briefly. She clarifies it compared to guilt. Guilt is, I did something wrong and I feel bad about it. And shame is, I'm the wrong thing. Like, I don't know that I did anything wrong, but there's something wrong with me and you all can smell it on me, I just know. So, let's see. I'm sorry. So shame is feeling like we're the wrong thing. And it's important to understand that those in the shame triad believe that they are not worthy of love and belonging on their own. They believe they have to perform in a certain way. So 2s perform in order to earn love by being helpful and loving first. They have to show their love in order to try to earn the love, or they think so. 3s try to earn love and belonging by winning and being the best, and 4s try to do it by being unique and special. The stance that the twos are in is the compliant or dependent stance. Now remember, stance is determined by the center of intelligence that is repressed. So twos, along with ones and sixes, are thinking repressed, and it just means that they move toward others to form their ideas and opinions. They do that externally with others, or they need a little extra time to do it. And also, they're oriented to the present moment, not terribly focused on the future or reflecting on the past. They're putting out the fires of right this minute. The deadly sin of the two is pride. And that's counterintuitive when you think about somebody who acts as such a servant in life. But if you did your reading, you know that they also aren't asking for help. And so when they notice all of your needs before you ever have processed them, and they've met those needs before you've asked for help, it can hurt when they notice that you're not noticing their needs and meeting them in that way. Because twos aren't asking for help, but giving all that help, that's where we end up with the deadly sin or passion of pride. Like, if you're the solution to everyone's problem and have no problems of your own, that's the image you're trying to get to, that's pride. That's easier understood in that way. Their fear is of being rejected, and their motivation is to be needed and appreciated. So the possible wings of the two are the 1 or the 3. In times of stress, they move to the unhealthy qualities of the 8, and in times of security to the positive qualities of the 4. Some things from the reading that I thought were worth mentioning is that, like on 116, what lies beneath the pride was a question that was asked, and the answer that they suggested was terror. What if the person rejects me and my request? How could I withstand the shame and humiliation? So I guess I thought it would have been like not wanting to be a bother that might keep a 2 from asking for help. I didn't think of the fear of rejection. That was an interesting thought for me. Because 2s naturally sense the needs of others and seek to meet them, they can become resentful when others in turn don't notice their needs and meet them. But unless they've begun to do their work, they're often unaware of their own ulterior motives. 2s believe they have to be needed before they can be loved. So a favorite question of Suzanne Stabile's is, what's mine to do? And she asks her guests on her podcast, what's yours to do? So all numbers bring something to the table that is unique and special, which benefits their community. There are reserved and reluctant people who need to ask themselves this question, what's mine to do, in order to be prompted to recognize their responsibility in the community. But other proactive numbers, like the 2 who are inclined to act and dive in there even before they've been asked, may benefit from reminding themselves that not everything is their responsibility. Asking themselves, is this mine to do, might cause them to take a breath and realize that others might be more gifted for that particular task. Relationships mean everything to 2s, and 2s are the most relational number on the Enneagram. A fact that I heard, I don't even know. It was Suzanne Stabile who said it, and I don't know where her information came from, but when she talked about, and she is a 2, when she talked about 2s being thinking repressed, she said 80% of the thinking that 2s do are about relationships, are about their interpersonal interactions. Well, we're so lucky to have a 2 here to help us understand the 2s in our lives better and maybe identify ourselves as a 2. It's Kay Bontrager-Singer, and she can come on up. And I suspect she's familiar to many of you, but when you take a seat and take a breath, Kay, I'll just ask you to introduce yourself and what you do, a little bit about your life to the group.
Is this on? No.
Okay, got it. So yes, I'm Kay Bontrager-Singer, and I am currently a pastor at Faith Mennonite Church. Your pastor, Darren, and I have pastored together for 14 years, on our 15th year together. And before that, I was a florist, and before that, I was a mental health therapist. So there's my history of my two expressions.
So what led you to the Enneagram, Kay?
15, maybe almost 20 years ago now, I was having one of those kind of midlife falling apart. And what it really was my two was getting way overactivated. And I was part of the Faith Mennonite congregation before I was pastor. And it was a perfect place for me because so many people needed me. I just had the sign on my back, I'll help you, you know. And then the resentment started. I was exhausted, and the resentment started setting in. And I remember saying, if that phone rings again, I'm going to scream. Well, of course the phone rang again. And so that sent me into doing my own work. And the Enneagram was a very, very significant tool for that. I remember being first recognizing the Enneagram. I was working down on my floral shop, listening to a Richard Rohr tapes on Enneagram. And he said, when twos realize that they're twos, they cry. And there I was standing with tears coming down my cheeks. And I was like, oh, this is so terrible. I mean, you know, he said, you know, you're really, really this nice person. And then you have these moments when you turn into a total lion. It's like, oh, yes, you know. That resentment factor that gets there. So that's how my journey started.
Yeah, and it sounds like you recognized yourself as a 2 pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think so. I was under the impression you don't take the test. You do the listening, you do the work to get there. And so that's how I got there, and in time then did the test.
Right. So what the Enneagram, it sounds like it has given you greater peace within yourself. How has it given you insight? Maybe you can tell us specifics of how it gave yourself insight into yourself and in your relationship with others.
So it was extremely helpful for Jamie, my husband, and I. About that same time, believe it or not, things were hard for us too. And it dawned on me, if I am how I am, and I really at this gut core level, he is who he is at his gut core level, and I'm not going to change that, and I have to see what I could love and appreciate about that. I know it sounds really simple, but anyway, it wasn't. It was a challenge getting there. And he's a 9, and we both worked on Enneagram together. We went to Albuquerque to one of, I think it was Rohr, and I think it was Russ Hudson was his guest, well known in Enneagram field. They had them for seminars for week, however long it was, and in various ways. So that became very helpful for us to do that together. And then, lo and behold, Darren is a 9. And I asked if I could say that he was a 9, and he said yes. And the work that Jamie and I had done just transferred very wonderfully to working with Darren as understanding each other. Oh. So a couple things I learned about that was 2s make mountains out of molehills, and 9s make molehills out of mountains. And so, say you've got a pastoral care concern. I know it's going to be this huge, big deal, and things are going to blow up, and he goes, it's not going to be anything. And then we realize, okay, that's usually a good sign that it's going to be somewhere in the middle. And so that's just one of those things we laugh about, but we check off of back when we recognize about each other.
Interesting, yeah. So the childhood experience is an important part of the developing personality. How did your 2-ness show up as you look back at your childhood?
Well, that was a little bit harder for me. I think I was really a pleaser. I remember getting so tired of my sisters having fights with my mom about the length of their skirts because they wanted them so much shorter. And I made it clear that, Mom, I was never going to fight with you about the length of my skirts. And fortunately, when I came to the age of caring about it, it was when the minis and the maxis were in. So I did.
Oh, where do you fall in birth order then?
I'm the youngest by 10 years.
Oh.
And so I was a pretty compliant child. And when I think back about, like one time I really think, oh, this is my 2 energy. When I started high school, we moved from Yoder, Kansas, a small little community, to Archibald, Ohio. And my parents talked about this, be praying about this and being God's will. And so I did not want to do that, but I never ever voiced that because I was compliant, and that was the right thing to do. And I'm thinking, wow, I could have at least thrown some bit of a fuss. I mean, I would have gone along with it still, but it probably would have been healthy to have expressed some of my lack of interest in doing this, making this move.
Yeah. So the sin or passion of your type is pride, as we talked about a little bit earlier. So in tending to the needs of others, 2s often both deny their own neediness and puffs up their image as a savior to many. Is that something that resonates with you?
I have worked really intentional with several close friends, and I have what's called a spiritual friendship. Meet every week, been doing this for 15, 16 years. And I have worked intentional about being vulnerable and showing my vulnerabilities because my tendency is to want to conceal those. And so, that's an intentional work that I pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your favorite part about being a 2?
Oh, I just love everybody. I didn't even think about it till I brought my cup along. I realized, of course, it says love, It's easy for me to love people. And, have compassion, folks. People who a lot of others may have trouble with. I can usually see below the surface and find things that I really can feel compassionate and care about them.
That's a great trait in anyone, but especially in a pastor, I would think.
Yeah, it's helpful.
So Deanna Beth talked about stress and security tonight. We know that the 2s go to 8 in stress and 4 in security. How do you experience that? Do you see that in your life?
Yeah, so just the other night, Jamie comes home from work late, and there's nothing that bugs me more than he gets home, and then he sits in his car and talks on the phone yet, instead of coming in, and I had dinner ready, and it was I just had it. And so he walks in, and I'm going, I can't believe you do that, and he's like, totally blown away. That was that 8 anger coming through, and it sort of surprised me. That's not very often. I rarely express anger very directly and strongly, but that was one of those moments when that came through. The 4, I intentionally nurture my creative side because I believe that is what helps me move and be healthy into 4. By the way, you look very 4-ish. You're dressed very 4-ish. You know that, right?
That's what I am.
That's right. But, so I intentionally work at nurturing that through creativity. Our spiritual practices that involve creative
Nice.
Journaling and writing and drawing.
Are there things that are hard about being a 2 that you wish people knew?
Yeah, we really do like recognition. So if I take you a meal, it's really nice to get a thank you note. And I know this about 2 friends, and I am very intentional about sending notes and expressing gratitude. Because 2, that's our pride, I mean, we just have to sort of swallow it and admit it. We like being acknowledged for what we do, but I also want people to know that we have a big, generous, open hearts, and can be very loyal, and we just stick with people through their crap.
Have you found, I'm going to go back here a second. So you're in helping professions. Is being a 2 in a helping profession a match made in heaven, or can it be destructive for you?
Yes. So if I hadn't done my work before I became a pastor, I would have within a year sunk. I could not have done pastoring because I just couldn't. I just took on everybody's needs and did everything possible, and totally overwhelmed myself. So that's what I have to watch for. I created a, sort of this mantra dropped from the sky for me, and it has held for a long, long time. It's been what I use to monitor that, and that is, give what you can give from your heart, nothing more, nothing less, and throw out the shoulds and the oughts. And I register with that all the time I go in and recognize, do I have enough there? Have I done enough spiritual practices, whatever those things are that fill that space, to be able to offer and give? And if not, then I need to say no. And I have learned to do that. So you were asking the best and the worst, right? Of being into
Yeah.
In a helping position.
Yeah.
in a helping way, yeah. And I think the best is I really take great joy in pastoring, and I love doing pastoral care. So it's a good fit in that way. And I love my congregation. Twos love their people, and they know I love them. And
I would think it would be really hard to know when it is appropriate to say no in a pastoral situation, but especially for a 2. So how do you know when it's time to say no?
well, it is that checking. Do I have any sense of resentment going on? That resentment is my barometer. And if there's some resentment rising because I've said yes too many times or I'm exhausted, that's what I use. And I've gotten pretty good at saying no. I said no to not going to taking someone at 8 o'clock last night to Kroger's to get coffee because they were out of coffee. They called. I mean, they tried.
Did it take work to learn to recognize that feeling as resentment?
Yeah, I think that was some of that early work. And some of that early work, that resentment just looked like fiery internal anger. Anger. I wouldn't do a lot of externally expressing that. But I burned inside for quite a while and began to recognize, that is resentment.
I think that's a really important thing for 2s to hear, to learn to recognize that and use that in their spiritual practices that you've done as a checkpoint. Have you found a way to be comfortable identifying your own needs and then asking for help with what you need?
I think I'm getting better at that. Yeah, again, that is partly stopping, paying attention, going inside, using spiritual practices to be aware. And, here's a good example. So Friday night, I was with a group of girlfriends. They were from church people. And I was to preach a funeral sermon on Sunday afternoon, and I was to preach Sunday night. And I said, I know if I was a good pastor, I could do both. Because I know a lot of pastors have to do that. But I haven't gotten either one of those ready yet, and I really don't want to preach Sunday night, and I'm in this funk. And they looked at me and said, don't preach then. And it happened that the worship leader was there, and she said, okay, we've got it covered. We'll move things around. I'll think how to fill that time in. And I was able to say, okay. And I didn't preach Sunday night, and it was lovely. And I had a really good sermon for my memorial service. I just had to focus on that.
Nice. Yeah, it's always worth asking, maybe, or expressing those needs.
Yeah. I was able to express that, and they responded.
Nice, yeah. So I'd like you to circle back to the spiritual practices that you hit on and just talk about those a little more, like the creativity. How do you express that in spiritual practices?
There have been times, early on, I was doing, every day I would sit and paint watercolors or something, and I would just sit down and see what would come. And I did that for a long, long time, and that was sort of revealing. It expressed a lot. Some of that stuff's hard to quite put in words what it does for you. But I did that. I found journaling as an important spiritual practice that helped me become aware of my own emotions and feelings and reactions to things. I do what I call sacred reading. So it may not just be scripture, but you know, I may be reading Rumi or who knows, lots of different people who I admire. Walking, being in nature are all important spiritual practices. And beauty is really, really important to me, and creating beauty and noticing beauty. And that somehow or another is connected, I think.
So you, Kay, a unique and beautiful 2, what do you have to offer your community as a 2 and as Kay when all the numbers are gathered together? What is yours to do?
Noticing and paying attention and watching and noticing Christ and being aware of Christ in each person who I'm interacting with.
Gorgeous. That's lovely. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you were willing to share for us and teach us so well about 2s.
Can I tell you one more thing?
Yes.
So I just realized this is so typical too here, an email exchange this afternoon. So, where did it go? Am I going the right direction with that or this way? Well, so I was, I can just tell you about it. I sent a note to somebody that said, oh, I'm feeling in a funk today because such and such just has used twice again. It's somebody who I walk with closely who has drug addictions, which makes it that he may get kicked out of his recovery group, and the housing option that I've been working so hard to help him get, it may fall through because of this. And this person wrote back and said, okay, just remember, this is not your work, this is his work. And a way of reminding me that, you know, when I get hooked in, like, oh, I got to take care of this on another, the gentle reminder that I can be caring, but I can't do this person's work for him.
You can't do all the work.
Right.
And I just noticed that we kind of flew through your questions. So do you mind if I ask you a little deeper questions about some things that you addressed?
Sure.
So one of the things that I was hearing you say is the anger that you were feeling and the resentment. So 2s in times of stress go to 8. And so we know that 8 is in the anger triad. We know that 8s express their anger. So that might have been something that that was a way that you were expressing your stress. Not everybody will go to anger and feel that resentment. They'll express it in other ways. But Kay was going to 8. I don't know if there's actually a question there, but I do know that Suzanne Stabile says we don't want to avoid going to the stress numbers because she believes, and many teachers believe, that going to those stress behaviors is part of how we take care of ourselves. So when she finds the backbone of the 8, that is a helpful thing for her to identify. If she can do it while compartmentalizing the anger and not inflicting it on others. Do you ever find yourself inflicting it on others, or is that all internal for yourself?
I never do. No, Janie is the main one. My spouse is the one who's going to. Other people rarely see my anger.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to ask you about the spiritual practices, the writing, the creativity, the drawing, and the being in nature. Can you explain to somebody who might need a little bit more guidance, how is it spiritual for you?
Everything's spiritual. I mean, I think of spiritual in a really broad term. It's those things that connect us to ourselves, to God through nature, through others, and awaken something within us. Wow, that's very good.
I like it. Yeah. Oh gosh, there was one other question that I was going to ask you. Is there anything that you want to go deeper with, Lori? I don't mean to throw you on the spot or anything.
I felt like I
Yeah.
asked the questions, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Sure.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's Jennifer. If you
Yes, I can see it is.
First of all, when I saw you here, I thought, oh, such a 2, such a giving, helpful, loving, and then most creative person. Oh my goodness. But I
She's always really complimentary.
But you are like the epitome of a two and this creative four. It was just, it hit me. But my question is, how did you being a two with your boys? How did that, was there any enabling? What were the pros and cons? And she has wonderful, wonderful sons, especially one that we know very well. Good friend with us.
So I'm going to make sure that those who are streaming and will watch on the video will understand what the question is. So Jennifer is asking how her two-ness impacted Kay's mothering. Did it ever seem like enabling if you're trying to solve everyone's problems for them? I'd love to hear about that.
You know, interestingly, my boys didn't get a lot of that from me. Yeah, I would say one place that it showed up is every morning when they would leave the house for school, I would give them a blessing and say, "You are God's beloved son in whom God is well pleased." And that was really hard to do on mornings that I was angry with them. But that would be one thing that I did. But yeah, I think I sort of reacted to enabling parents, and so I was pretty cued into that one.
Awesome. Any other questions then?
Okay, go ahead.
You know, when reading that chapter, you talked about two sometimes walking into a room and being able to sense, what type of person is experiencing or sense this. I just wondered, have you done that, and are you sometimes incorrect, wrong, as you approach that person? In other words, sensing things they need and start working on helping that need.
Yeah, I have to learn to pull myself back and not assume that what I think they need is what they need.
And the question is, the book explained that twos can walk into a room and sense who has the greatest needs, sense what everybody's needs are, and set about to meet them. He wonders how Kay has experienced that and if she's ever been wrong.
Yeah, and yes, and I have been wrong, and I've learned to pull back on that, and wait more often for people to ask, and then I can choose if I respond or not.
I wanted to ask one more question related to Jennifer's parenting question. Deanna Beth and I talked to a two mother last year, and she said that it was really hard for her as her children got older and needed her less, because that need felt like love to her. And so she had to find different ways to experience that love when her children got older. Have you felt that?
What I discovered is that every stage of the children as they got older, I liked better. I did not particularly like particularly the young needy stages, and so that has not necessarily. Maybe it's because I got a whole congregation who can need me now. So so I'm okay with that. My kids needing me.
And I wonder, when you have learned to say no, can no be a complete sentence for you, or do you look for, but here's maybe who you can turn to solve that problem? Or can you just say no?
Yes and no. What twos can do is make you feel guilty so I can do this to my sister really bad. So she'll say, "Can you pick up so-and-so from school for me?" And I go, yeah, I'm really busy. I can maybe fit it in between this and that, but yeah, I'll do it. Really. I'll do it, but you should feel guilty for asking. So that's one thing I have to watch as a two, is I can make people feel guilty.
Oh, and I had one other question. When you talk about doing your work, and I can tell that you have, our interactions, I've always felt like Kay's got her stuff together. She's really mature. She's really good. And so it could be a personal question, and you shouldn't feel obligated to say it, but what has that work looked like? Has it been enough to read the books and to contemplate and to be reflective about what you're learning? Do you see a spiritual counselor or done counseling of your own?
Yeah, I've had a spiritual director for a long time, and this spiritual friend I meet with every week. It's an ongoing thing. There have been times when it's been more intense, and the first few years, boy, I cried a lot. I mean, it was really intense the first few years. Oh, I also try to do silent retreats, ideally once a month, but then I get sort of sloppy at that, and then I have to sort of get them back on my calendar. Good, but that's another thing
Yeah.
that helps.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I really appreciate how generous you've been with us. So we'll turn our attention now to Lori, and she'll take us through spiritual practices and relational advice for the twos.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I might try sitting down too. So, but it's not part of my motor plan, so I don't know if this will work. All right. For those of you in relationships with a 2 or think that you might be in a relationship with a 2, I want you to know some things. 2s are great to have as friends or partners. They remember details about you, important dates, what you like, what you don't like, and they show you that they remember. So this is the person in your office that always remembers your birthday and gives you a birthday card. This is a spouse who remembers when your anniversary is and celebrates it in a way that's meaningful to you. They want to know how you are and how they can help you. These are the people that strangers tell their problems to. A 2's basic desire is to be appreciated, loved, and wanted, and they will put aside their own needs to focus on the needs of others. A 2 is very in tune with the needs of others and will go out of their way to help. But they're not always in tune with their own needs and may need help figuring those out. They're so willing to help others and to anticipate their needs that they may struggle with feeling resentment if it seems like no one works to understand and meet their needs. If we wait for a 2 to tell us what they need, we may be waiting a long time. So when we're in a relationship with a 2, we need to work to be proactive in meeting their needs. And while it's not your responsibility to anticipate and meet every need of the 2, there are definitely things you can do to help them feel loved and seen. Remind them that they are enough and are lovable right now. Give them lots of physical affection, hand-holding, hugs, etc. And take an interest in what they're interested in. They're so good about asking about you. Make sure you return the favor. Give them opportunities for self-care and make sure they use it and don't give it to someone else. Be grateful for what they do, but make sure they know you love them for who they are, not what they do. Plan intentional time to sit down and ask them what their needs are, and make them take a break if they're feeling overwhelmed or burnt out. Remember especially that in conflict, a 2 may not just feel their own feelings, but maybe taking on the feelings of those around them or the feelings of the partner in conflict. So let them know it's okay to take a break and cool down before working toward resolution. And talking about growth, and I agree, we've talked about growth is growth and spiritual is spiritual, and we don't separate between personal and spiritual because it's all spiritual. But I'm going to talk about some specific ways to grow as a 2 and then some spiritual practices that a 2 might practice. And in interest of showing you as many 2s as possible, I have a 2 to show you here. Some of the strengths of a 2. Oh, hang on. Maybe, I'm not sure why there's no volume.
And to embrace them in warmth and goodness and to be with them in their journey.
My greatest strengths as a 2 include an enormous capacity for loving and caring for important others in my life, for compassion and support of others. And that's that's really needed in the world. And I think on the high side of the two, if that can be done from a free space without expectation and without waiting for the kudos to come back, it can be a really beautiful thing.
Twos, you are essential for making our world a kinder, more thoughtful place. You work hard to earn your names as helper, lover, caretaker, and you are able to sense the needs of others and take pleasure in meeting them. You think so much about others and their needs that you may be surprised and offended to hear that you're thinking repressed. Just like the ones whose thinking is so much about answering the inner critic and defending our actions to be right, the two spends most of their thinking reflecting on relationships. They then find themselves disappointed when others don't reciprocate. It's important for twos to realize that others are not spending their time thinking about your needs and making sure they're met. So you need to work on that for yourselves. Get in the practice of asking yourself several times a day, what do I need? And practice being able to articulate that to yourself and others. Recognize that part of being a two is that you will sometimes, or often, depending on where you are and the situation you're in, feel resentment. That others are not tuned in to your needs, as tuned into your needs as you are to theirs. Just like ones feel that anger, note that resentment and use it to identify and take care of your needs. Don't expect the people in your life to automatically know what you need. Work on communicating that directly. It might be helpful to have an accountability partner, a spouse, a therapist, a spiritual director, someone who knows you well to work with you and help you figure those out. If you make being the helper your identity, chances are that you will find yourself saying yes to too many things. Work to not say yes reflexively. Ask for time to reflect, to think about it. Get yourself a no guru if you need to help you process and reflect on those decisions. I serve as my husband's no guru. He says yes automatically, I say no automatically, so we help balance each other out. When you feel that impulse to jump in and help, give yourself a minute to ask, is this mine to do? You don't have to fix everything. Let me show you another short video about just some of the challenges of being a two.
My greatest challenges as a two. I have a really heightened awareness of my own needs, other people who are really important to me, their needs, particularly my children. So I spend a lot of time and energy on, am I going to have what I need to feel okay? Am I going to be properly fed? Will I be properly cared for and loved? And all this attention goes to that. It takes a lot of time, and it can take up entire days. And likewise with my children. I feel a sense of panic if I'm worried that somebody I love is not going to get what they need, or I'm not able to offer it, or I'm failing that in some way. It's stressful and it's painful, and it also distracts from the entire universe of other things you can put your attention on. So it's out of balance.
I think my biggest challenge is saying no and having boundaries that are healthy for me and also healthy for others. Because I can't do all things and be all things for all people as much as I might like to.
And what happens when you try?
Well, I get tired, and I can also get resentful when I do too much for people. And that then I become an angry giver, and that's just not very pretty.
I really appreciated, what you said about spiritual practices. And talked about some that we're not necessarily going to talk about tonight, but I think that they were very helpful to think about. What feeds your soul, and how you tap into that creative energy to feed your soul. Some things that we are going to talk about, we're going to kind of work down the line of what might come most naturally to a 2, to things that might stretch you. So something that 2s are great at is often hospitality and service. You are great at making people feel welcome and special and a part of the group. You are great at meeting the needs of others. When I think of 2s, I'm often reminded of the Bible's telling of Mary and Martha. And I think if you're a 2, you may often relate to Martha and then use that story to feel bad about yourself. Because Martha didn't do the right thing. She didn't sit at Jesus' feet. She was too busy working in the kitchen. But I think maybe that what gets lost in the story is that Martha was still doing important work. She was doing work for Jesus and for those around him. But she was feeling that 2 resentment, that she was seeing to everyone's needs and no one, Mary, was helping her. So Jesus' invitation was for her to consider taking time in her work to allow herself to sit and listen to his words in order to fill her own heart. But that didn't make her work of hospitality, of meeting others' needs, any less important, just to let her know there was another way. You are also uniquely gifted to serve as a discipleship or accountability partner to another believer. Because you are so relational, you can develop the strength and depth of a bond needed in this relationship. As we move down the line to maybe less comfortable practices for the 2, I would encourage you to explore practices of solitude in your spiritual walk. Since you are so relational and often define yourself by how others see you, it's important for your growth for you to learn to sit in solitude so that you can explore your own heart, recognize your own needs. That's the first step in being able to express them, is recognizing them. Solitude gives 2s the opportunity to become Mary for a while. It's an intentional choice to be present to your own needs before the divine, and to not believe the lie that I'm only loved for what I do for others. I'm loved for who I am. And then lastly, you may have heard the phrase, don't be so thirsty. 2s are in danger of being thirsty or hungry for approval, for attention, and for love. So consider the spiritual practice of fasting as a way to ground yourself in reality that God is enough and faithful to meet your needs. So 2s, you show the image of God by serving the needs of others. You are uniquely qualified to see the good in them and to help them see it too. Remember that it's okay to have needs. So we have a little time at the end. If anybody has any questions, we can open it up for questions.
Question. I've been trying really hard to separate in my mind the differences between a 9 and a 2. Can you help me to do that? Now, maybe she would be good suited for that because her husband is a 9 and she's a 2. But because they're meshing in my brain somehow.
So I can parrot to you a story that Suzanne Stabile says. Oftentimes, 2s and 9s, or people aren't sure if they're a 2 or a 9. That's a common one to get confused. And her quick throwaway answer is, do you care about what people think? And if the person says, oh yeah, I care an awful lot about what people think about me, she said, then you're not a 9, because 9s don't care what people think of you. The reason that they're confused a lot with each other is that they're both very others-centered. 2s want to help others. 9s want to give in to others so that there is peace. She also tells this story because she is a 2 and her husband is a 9. That phrase that parents use all the time, if so-and-so jumped off a building, if everybody was jumping off the bridge, would you do it? And she said, I, as a 2, would be there at the bridge trying to tell everyone that they're in danger and try to stop them. And my husband wouldn't want you to jump off the bridge, and he wouldn't join you. He'd be back at home watching TV. He's not going to get involved in other people's stuff. Those are a couple of stories that she tells when people are discerning about that. And then the only other thing I would say is these 2s and 9s are in different triads, and they're in different stances. So you can look at shame or anger. I find that 9s being in the anger triad that's a really fascinating thing. And every time I talk to a 9 about it, I get a little bit more insight about it. And 2s being, I feel like I have to help and be other-centered in order to earn love. I won't be loved or belong unless I serve others. And you can look at the repression. It was easy for me to recognize my repressed center, that I was doing repressed. So those are kinds of things that you can look at. What would you add to that, Lori?
The other thing I think is, you touched on a little, is I think the 9 has trouble recognizing what is theirs to do. The 2 thinks everything is theirs to
interesting, yeah.
do.
So I can address that.
Yeah, please do. You can use my mic.
Okay. So as Darren and I in pastoral care, it's very easy for me to see what people need, of course, or how to respond to situations that seem complicated. And for him, it's not so straightforward. He is not so sure, so he'd prefer to have the kind of pastoral care that is more structured, and you sort of know what is expected and how you're expected to do it. And I love the pastoral care that you sort of impromptu, improvise, that sort of thing. And I think that's the difference between the 9 and the 2.
That's helpful. Anyone else? Come on up.
You
Yeah,
can
I
come
would
on
love
up.
that. I wonder if we should turn on this other one, if folks will have more questions.
Is it on? Mm-hmm.
First, I wanted,
I don't think it's on.
first I wanted to say,
It's not on. Push that button. No.
no, push the button till it's green. First, I wanted to say, I appreciated very much last week the vulnerability that you and your husband showed. And I really appreciated a lot that Chris had to say. And especially as he talked about, what learning how to respond to you and vice versa. So I began to say, I guess that Enneagram can do some stuff for you.
We think so.
Now, I have a question. Oh, first, before the question, when you mentioned the stress and the security arrows, I just wanted to confirm that I look at them the same way. I've thought of them, both the arrows moving out from the number, and one arrow is red and the other arrow is black. But you didn't mention colors. So,
Does it appear that way in the book? The red or black?
Okay, it probably doesn't appear that way in the book, but I've looked at a lot of anagrams in color, and
Yeah.
so maybe so the red arrow is stress one that's moving out from your number, and the black arrow that's moving out from your number is the relief,
The security.
the security. Yes, that's. I just wanted to make sure what you said and what I'm looking at are the same.
When we see arrows, the one that's going away from our number is going toward the stress number. And then the arrow that's coming toward our number is coming from our security number. So I haven't seen, oh, there we go. We have a,
Numbers here, what number does that make me?
That makes you too.
But
And maybe you were just looking at a different type of graph.
They're not all color-coded like that, I
Yes,
would say.
I have one here that's color-coded. and,
Okay.
We'll take
and
a
so-
look at it.
So I think we were saying the same thing, but I wanted to confirm that.
Mm-hmm.
The other question, the question that I have is, it seems to me that one can be one particular number at home and not that way outside at all. That's a puzzle for me. And I heard a little bit of that as Kate was talking. She mentioned for my husband, I express that kind of anger, but I don't express it elsewhere. But anyway, yeah, in light of that, for instance, I do not think I'm a 2. I didn't come up here to announce that, but I do not think I'm a 2. But sometimes at home, I give a lot of things and I want my wife to recognize those.
Oh,
And so I wondered about that when I was reading, this chapter. But I don't do that outside.
it's interesting. Do you think you know what your number is yet?
I'm not sure, but I'm thinking more of 5 right now.
Interesting.
But I just wondered, in the home, sometimes it seems that we do certain things that we don't do outside.
Well, you might recall that the advice that I passed on, if we were going to answer the question, like the questions at the beginning of each chapter, if we get to one where we think, well, I would answer it this way at home, but I would answer it this way at work.
Yeah.
I think that the thinking is we are more ourselves at home than in other places. And the other advice they gave was think about how you were when you were 20. Because when we were acting strictly on that's when we were acting strictly on our personalities and hadn't learned to soften, hadn't matured out of some tendencies. So, I don't know what number, and I also think that our wing numbers
Yes.
can affect that, or when we're acting in stress, or when we're acting in security. We're all over those numbers. So that could account for, I behave differently at home than I behave
Okay.
at work. It's an interesting
Yeah.
thing to think about. Keep observing. I notice that you're really observing yourself and others, and I think that's the best way
Yeah.
to get the most from the class.
And lastly, thanks for sharing Darren with us, even though he's a 9.
Yes.
I do think that you're going to notice, like as you notice how you are at home compared to outside. I mean, I could say the same thing. Chris definitely gets more of my anger than people at work do. I mean, Jennifer doesn't get my anger at work. So I do think it often is where you're most yourself, and because it's a safe place usually.
Yeah.
So, and if home wasn't a safe place growing up, you might have made adjustments. People think that they're 9s because they were peacemakers at home, when maybe that wasn't the core of what they were. Maybe they really are something else, but because they had to keep the peace, they think of themselves as a 9. So I do think that you have to kind of dig down a little bit to think through those issues.
And we probably have time for one more question, if there is one. Well, thank you for the handful of you that came out. It's nice to be able to talk to someone in person when we're presenting. And we will see you next week when we discuss 3s. Thank you.
Thank you. Did we?